Archaeologists in Egypt are celebrating music, a newly unearthed tomb, as a one-of-a-kind find. Petra is one of the most breathtaking places on Earth. It is one of the new 7 wonders of the world, and every single year, over 2 million tourists come here to see this impossible city carved straight into the mountain itself. But from the outside, you're only seeing the surface of what lies beneath this place. Because in October 2024, using advanced ground scanning technology, archaeologists finally broke into a hidden chamber that hadn't seen air for 2,000 years. Inside, they didn't find Pharaoh's gold or anything from Hollywood stories. They found something that left the scientific community shaken, from spirit blocks surrounded by ancient legends to a mysterious chalice still held in a skeleton's grip. What lies beneath the rose-red stone is far more unsettling than any film ever suggested. So what exactly was buried under Petra? And how did it change everything we've been told about this city for over 2 centuries? Let's understand it from the beginning. Music beneath Petra's perfect image. In 1812, in the desert of Jordan, a man walked carrying a secret that could have cost him his life. His real name was most outsiders were never meant to see. When he finally convinced a Bedouin guide to take him through a narrow canyon called the Sick, he had to act carefully. One wrong move, one sign of curiosity, and he could be exposed as a foreigner hunting treasure. And then the canyon opened. Right in front of him stood Al-Khazan, a massive carved structure. That's where the name came from, Al-Khaz. For decades, people fired bullets at it, hoping to break it open and spill out gold, proof of a belief that refused to die. Then, in 1989, the film Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade turned this place into something global. Millions watched as a humble ceramic chalice, and now over 1 million tourists visit this place. And Jordan, which isn't a very rich country, earns nearly $8 billion annually from it. Petra became one of the most famous places on Earth. For years, people stood in front of it, took pictures. Almost no one asked what might be beneath it. It was treated like a wall, nothing more. Until 2024. That's when a research team decided to stop looking at the surface. What they found changed everything we thought we knew about this place, because beneath that perfect image, something had been waiting for over 2,000 years, the horrifying discovery. In 2024, a small research team arrived at the site. A few specialists from an archaeological institute in Amman, led by a field director who wasn't chasing treasure or fame. They were following something much less dramatic, a strange spot beneath the surface that didn't behave like normal rock. It held a different temperature as if something hollow. So they brought in ground-penetrating radar. It's a tool that sends invisible pulses into the earth. When those pulses hit something solid, they bounce music back on a screen. It creates a rough image of what's underneath without digging a single inch. What they saw wasn't random. It wasn't broken shapes or scattered debris. It was 12. Clear forms. That's when the digging began. At first, everything felt normal. Dry sand, loose rock. The air grew heavier, thicker than it should have been in the middle of a desert. A cold draft came out from below. Not warm desert air, cold. Inside there was a sealed chamber, and inside that chamber, 12 skeletons. They were exactly where they had been placed over 2,000 years ago. That alone. It was shocking because in Petra almost every tomb ever found had been looted long ago. But this was untouched. But something else felt wrong. The chamber wasn't dry. The walls were damp. Dark patches of mold spread across the stone. The bones themselves didn't look ancient and brittle. They looked soft, almost preserved in a way. That didn't make sense. Their bodies formed a near-perfect circle, hands resting in position. And yet, even that wasn't the most unsettling part. Because as one of the researchers leaned closer, something caught their attention. One of the skeletons wasn't empty-handed. Its fingers were still wrapped around something that had been waiting there, untouched, the mysterious chalice. As to one skeleton in particular. It wasn't just lying there. It was holding something, still for more than 2,000 years. Not decorated, not first glance, but the way it was placed, the way it was held made it impossible to ignore. In Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the legendary Holy Grail wasn't gold or jeweled. It was a humble cup, simple, almost overlooked. A skeleton was found holding something almost identical. It felt like history had quietly mirrored fiction, or maybe the other way around, but the cup wasn't alone. Around the chamber, researchers began uncovering more objects, materials that usually don't survive together for this long. And if not destroyed by time, they are taken by looters. Because this wasn't a random burial. The placement of the cup wasn't accidental. In ancient Nabatean belief, the dead were often buried with items they would need in the afterlife, as if death was not the end, but a continuation, something meant for a final offering, or perhaps for what they believed came after. It also suggested something else. These weren't ordinary people people who were meant to carry something into the next world and keep holding it forever. And now when you step back and look at the full picture, the circle of bodies, it starts to feel less like a tomb and more like a designed space. This wasn't primitive survival. And that leads to a much bigger question. Because if people here could build something this precise, this intentional, then how did they manage to live at all in a place where survival itself should have been impossible? The death landscape. When people look at Petra today, they see beauty. Soft red stone, carved facades, a place that feels almost welcoming. Because in ancient times, this land was not beautiful. It was deadly. This region receives less than 6 in of rain in an entire year. There are no rivers flowing through it, nothing that could support a large population. And in summer, the temperature rises to nearly 40 to 45 degrees C. By every basic rule of survival, this place should have been empty. Even ancient historians noticed it. The Greek writer Diodorus Siculus described the people here as different. He wrote that they didn't farm crops, didn't plant trees. They relied on the harshness of the desert itself. If enemies tried to chase them into this land, they wouldn't survive. They would die of thirst, while the locals somehow endured. But the danger here wasn't just dryness, it was sudden violent water. The narrow canyon that leads into the city, known as the Sick, looks calm. Rain falling miles away can rush through it without warning. In April 1963, a group of tourists walked through that same path. There was no sign of danger, but miles away, a storm had already begun. Within minutes, a wall of water nearly 30 feet high came rushing through the canyon. There was no time to escape. 22 people were swept away and killed. Survivors who managed to climb onto higher ground later said the water still reached their knees even there. That single event revealed something terrifying. This place doesn't just lack water. It can turn into a deadly flood trap without warning. So now the question becomes unavoidable. How did anyone live here and sustain thousands of people for generations? Because if this land was truly as hostile as it appears, then what the people here achieved shouldn't have been possible at all. The impossible engineering for the people who built this city. This wasn't a weakness. Petra sat at a perfect intersection right where the incense trade routes from Arabia crossed the roads leading to Egypt and Rome. Music. And yet, reaching it was never easy. From the outside, it looked like nothing but mountains. Music. Solid rock stretching in every direction. No visible entrance, no open road. The only way in was through a narrow canyon, a hidden path that only the locals truly understood. And inside that fortress, they built something even more unbelievable. In a place where water didn't exist, they treated it like gold. Across the cliffs, they carved miles of narrow channels, not randomly, but with extreme precision. These channels carried water across the city. But here's the detail that changes everything. They were cut at a slight downward angle, almost perfectly measured, and the water would rush too fast and destroy the pipes too flat, and it wouldn't move at all. They maintained this balance over miles of uneven rock, without modern tools, without machines. When flash floods came rushing through the canyon, filled with mud and sand, they didn't waste that water. They built large stone tanks called settling basins. The dirty water would sit there, and the clean water would slowly flow out from the top into the next channel. Then, the water moved into reservoirs hidden across the city, stored safely for months. They created a system that stretched over 125 miles, all carved into stone. And the result was something almost unbelievable. In the middle of this harsh desert, Music Day had fountains, gardens, even a large pool near the Great Temple, bigger than what many cities could afford today. A place with no water had more than it needed. That level of control, that level of planning, doesn't belong to a struggling society. It belongs to a powerful one, which is why what happened next becomes so hard to understand. Because a city built like this, a system this advanced, shouldn't just disappear. The fall of Petra. At its peak, Petra was nothing like the empty ruins people see today. It was alive, a city of nearly 30,000 people, a place where cultures mixed, languages overlapped, and wealth moved constantly through its narrow paths. Caravans carrying incense, music silk, spices, all passed through here. A display of power, a statement that this city had mastered something others couldn't even attempt. But that balance didn't last forever. In 106 CE, the Roman Empire under Emperor Trajan took control of the Nabatean kingdom. Petra became part of a larger system. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The Romans expanded the city, added long colonnaded streets, improved structures, and even enlarged the theater to hold thousands more people. And then came the real shift. Not from war, trade routes began to change. Instead of long, slow caravans crossing the desert, Rome started favoring sea roads through the Red Sea. The city that once stood at the center of global trade was slowly being bypassed. Wealth didn't vanish overnight. It drifted away. Nearby ports grew. 551 CE struck again. This time, the damage was more serious. Recovery became harder. By the 7th century, the great center of trade had faded into something much smaller. Now, that's the story of Petra most people know, but that's only one side of it. There are other details about this city and its people. This place doesn't feel the same anymore. The dark side of Petra. There's something about Petra that most people never notice. There was no clear line between the living and the dead. This wasn't just a city with tombs outside its walls. Life and death existed side by side. Families didn't just bury their dead and leave. Inside many of these structures were rooms with stone benches built for something unusual. Families would sit inside the tombs of their ancestors and eat together. And then there's the arrangement of the dead themselves, the 12. Skeletons found beneath Al-Khazni were not simply buried. They were placed preserved in a way that feels almost intentional beyond death, in a place that faced wars, earthquakes, and time itself. They remained untouched as if something had protected them. But even before reaching the treasury, something else stands silently, massive stone blocks. Locals call them the Jinn blocks. These were not just monuments. They were homes for unseen beings, spirits that watched, that stayed, that followed those who showed disrespect. Music. And while historians see them as religious symbols, the idea itself reveals something deeper. And then there are the places above the city. High flat platforms carved into the mountains where some believe bodies were once left exposed, left for birds to strip away the flesh until only clean bones remained. Only then were they taken and placed into tombs. It's a process that changes how you see everything. Even the most beautiful structure here carries a warning. The facade of the treasury itself is decorated with figures meant to protect, including faces like Medusa, symbols used to keep evil away. Local stories still speak of strange sounds in the narrow canyon, whispers that don't feel distant, as if something is right behind you. So, when you combine all of this, the symbols carved into stone, it starts to feel like this wasn't just a city of trade, music. And if you think all of this is just stories or legends, then you might not be ready for what still lies hidden. The secrets still buried. What you see today in Petra is not the full city. Archaeologists estimate that nearly 85% of Petra is still buried underground, and this isn't just a random guess. The figure comes from Dr. Zidoun al-Muhsin, a Jordanian archaeologist from Yarmouk University, who spent decades excavating and studying the site. Based on years of fieldwork, he concluded that what we see today is only a small fraction of what actually exists. In a way, people aren't just visiting Music Petra, they're walking on top of it. In 2016, researchers using satellite imaging discovered a massive structure just outside the main city. Not a small ruin, a giant platform large enough to rival major monuments. It had been there for over 2,000 years until technology finally caught it. That discovery changed one thing very clearly. Petra is far bigger than we think and far less understood. Now, go back to what was found. In 2024, a sealed chamber directly beneath the most famous structure in the city. 12 skeletons, objects still in place, a moment frozen in time. That wasn't random, it was a glimpse. Because if something like that can exist right under a place visited by millions, then what does the remaining 85% hold? Maybe more tombs, maybe entire sections of the city still intact, or maybe things no one has even imagined yet. What do you think about this? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Also consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, because we'll be uploading more crazy stories like this one in the coming weeks. Until then, thanks for watching.